It is 7 o'clock. Good to see you this morning. It may be less than a week until coronavirus restrictions in England are relaxed to their lowest level since the pandemic began. But surging cases mean the Prime Minister is stressing it's a change which must happen cautiously. In a moment, we'll be asking the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Steve Barclay, about the coherence of that message. We'll also discuss suggestions that senior government figures are hindering rather than helping efforts to stem the racist abuse levelled against England's black footballers. Also on the programme, intolerable. MPs call for the long-term detainment of people with autism to be outlawed. The chair of the Health and Social Care Committee, Jeremy Hunt, says the practice is a national shame. We'll be speaking to him at 8:05. But also on the programme, you can cure your Euros heartbreak by getting behind another group of British stars. I'll be taking a look ahead to the Tokyo Olympics with the triathlete Alistair Brownlee at 9:45. It is Tuesday the 13th of July. Confusing and irresponsible. As the PM confirms the end of England's restrictions but urges caution, there is criticism from doctors and business owners.
That's not Freedom Day, that's not what we've been expecting. So again, it's a slight change, it's another change of what we've been told. I'm not happy with that.
I will never apologise for who I am. Marcus Rashford speaks out after suffering racist abuse following his missed penalty in the Euros final. A changing pattern, and the Conservative Party is attempting to break down Labour's historical stronghold among minority voters. An emergency like COVID calls for climate change to be treated in the same way as the global pandemic.
Good morning. You will be very glad to hear that after yesterday's torrential downpours, summer is set to make a welcome return, much drier today, and things improving really for the rest of the week.
Morning all. The government may be pushing ahead with the lifting of measures in England on Monday, but this morning it faces accusations of mixed messaging and irresponsible decision-making. As cases of the Delta variant surge, the British Medical Association says the end of most mandatory restrictions will have potentially devastating consequences. It comes as modelling from the government's scientific advisers suggests that deaths could rise to more than 200 a day by mid-August in what's been called an exit wave. Well, from July the 19th, the legal requirement to wear masks in shops and on public transport will go, although people are strongly encouraged to wear them in crowded spaces. Restrictions on socialising will be lifted, with the rule of 6 no longer applying indoors. But the Prime Minister says people should still show caution and restraint. What about business? Well, they'll be encouraged to continue asking customers to check in through the Test and Trace app, but it will no longer be a requirement. Nightclubs will be able to reopen and mass events will return, but venues are being urged to use the NHS COVID pass, which shows proof of vaccination, a negative test or natural immunity. One business owner told our reporter Gerald Tubb the messaging is confusing.
And as a matter of social responsibility, we're urging nightclubs and other
This
venues
owner of two
with large
Leeds
crowds
clubs
to
had been
make use
promised
of the
Freedom
NHS
Day
COVID
on the
pass,
19th.
which shows proof of
Instead, he
vaccination
heard the Prime
and
Minister
vaccination
saying he
or
should
recent
check
negative
his
test
customers'
or
COVID
natural
status.
immunity as a means of entry.
That's not what we've been told, is it? That's not Freedom Day, that's not what we've been expecting. So again, it's a slight change, it's another change of what we've been told. I'm not happy with that. You know, I think that we need to put the onus back on people and we need to let people make their own decisions. People need to take their own responsibilities.
It's a view shared by many in the hospitality industry across England, keen to get their businesses back into profit and weary of mixed messages. But the government's newfound caution contrasts with a survey of 18 to 30-year-olds that says more than 9 out of 10 intend to head back to late-night venues, 1 in 5 immediately.
The evidence that most young people intend to quickly return to socialising in bars and clubs like this as much as they did before the pandemic will only add to concerns that we could be heading for another big rise in infections.
From next week, all legal restrictions are being lifted. Masks on buses will no longer be compulsory. with a forecast from government advisers that deaths could rise to 200 a day. Some passengers are wary.
I think we should keep them until we know they're all safe, to be fair.
I think the people that have always worn them will wear them, and the people who don't still won't.
Behavioural experts warn that guidance and advice is not always effective.
If they want people to wear masks, the mandatory strategy was more advised. Even if you say, oh, we do advise you to wear them, it still signals COVID isn't a big deal anymore. Your risk of getting it is becoming smaller.
And that leaves the clinically vulnerable, like Rebecca, who has cerebral palsy, worried and angry.
I think it's a bad idea for people like myself, because if we don't all wear them, then it's not going to work. And it don't protect us as well. And I think it's a stupid idea to do it up on the 19th of July.
You feel it would put you at risk?
Yeah.
July the 19th was billed as the end of restrictions. Now it's been recast as the start of a new chapter in the pandemic, with cases rising and uncertainty remaining. Gerard Tubbs, Sky News, Leeds.
Pleased to say, joining us in the studio, the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Stephen Barclay. Ms Barclay, really good to see you this morning. I wonder if I can start with quite a broad question. Do you accept, as those we interviewed in Gerard's report have pointed out, that there have been, once again, mixed messages, but this time around July the 19th? I mean, is it a return to normality or not?
It's about getting the balance right. So we've been clear, we delayed for 4 weeks the step 4, which has enabled us to strengthen that vaccine wall. An additional 7 million vaccines have been delivered in that time. But there's no perfect time to start reopening, and that's what the Prime Minister, the Chief Medical Officer, Chief Scientific Advisor were clear on yesterday. So what we're doing is we're reopening with the summer holidays, with the summer weather. That is seen as the best time to do so. We are going to have to live with the virus and return to normal, but at the same time be cautious, and that's the balance that the Prime Minister was striking yesterday.
But according to the government's own scientists, the consequence of opening up on July the 19th is, and estimates vary, but perhaps as high as 200 deaths a day. I mean, is that an acceptable price for reopening?
Well, what they also said is there is no perfect time, and actually reopening when the schools are back in September, reopening when the colder weather is also bringing other challenges, also brings its risks. So there's no perfect time to do this. What we've done is deploy the vaccine, an extra 7 million. Opening when the schools are going to be shut is seen as the optimum time to do so. But it's about getting that balance right, so people reaching their own judgments, being sensible, following the guidance. But we also need to get back to normal. Businesses need to fire up. We need to get the economy going, and those are important as well, because there are consequences to not doing that, both economically and in terms of people's health.
Of course there are. Of course there are. But again, to return to the original question, in terms of mixed messaging, we have been told a variety of things that now seem rather shaky. For example, the idea that this pathway out of lockdown is irreversible. And Boris Johnson said back in Downing Street at tail end of February, we will not go back. We are now travelling on a one-way road to freedom. I mean, that's wrong, isn't it? That's just simply not correct. We could see restrictions being reapplied later on in the year.
Well, I think the message has been very clear throughout, which is the vaccine is the key. People need to get their jabs. People have responded.
But it's not irreversible, is it? Let's just clear this up. Is it reversible or not?
Well, we have taken the cautious. So the Prime Minister addressed this at the press conference yesterday. We've been cautious in order to seek for it to be irreversible. But one never knows. What
he did back in February when he said we will not go back.
But
we are now travelling on a one-way road to freedom.
Well, the vaccine has provided that wall. An extra 7 million vaccines have been delivered as a result of the extra 4 weeks. And that's why we've taken that extra time. But we need to learn to live with the virus. We need to get those businesses open. Some businesses have been closed for 16 months. So it's right we get the economy moving in that way and learn to live with the virus. But the key throughout, and our message has been consistent, that the vaccine is key. Your viewers have responded to that. That's why so many people...
It is perhaps the one thing the government has been consistent on, that the vaccine is key to all of this. Let's talk about vaccine passports. Again, Nadeem Zahawi back in February. We're not planning to have a passport in the UK. Michael Gove on this programme. Will I need one to go to large sporting events? No. Passports, that's not being planned. And yesterday, we again hear from the Prime Minister backtracking. that these businesses, perhaps which will have large crowds within them, should be using them as a matter of social responsibility.
Well, I mean, if you're saying, is this unprecedented? Is this complex? Is this challenging? Has the government, have our scientists been learning about the virus as we went through? We saw that before Christmas when the Kent variant came along. We had to change our plans. Of course, we've followed the data and we've changed our plans if the data has required that. We've followed the science throughout, but it's been complex, it's been unprecedented. I think your viewers appreciate that, but they also recognise that the vaccine is the way through this. We have deployed that. 2/3 of the adult population now having their 2 jabs. So the vaccine is the way forward, but we also need to live with this condition and get the economy moving again.
Sure. I will note, however, in the space of about a week and a half, the emphasis being placed on all of this by the government has changed entirely. From, ministers referring to it as Freedom Day on this programme, it's now softly, be as cautious as we can. I mean, just in terms of masks, we had Robert Jenrick on the 4th of July saying that people need to take personal responsibility. You had, your boss at the Treasury saying that he was going to stop wearing them as soon as the requirement was dropped. Now we're being told that wearing masks is to be encouraged in some settings. I mean, where is the consistency?
I think people are grown up. They understand that many people are frustrated with wearing masks. It's not a particularly pleasant experience if, for example, you're on a long train journey and if the carriage is empty, then people quite rightly then say, well, is it necessary? And that's what step 4 and the vaccine enables us to get rid of. But at the same time, if you're on a very busy commuter tube, for example, if you're with people you don't frequently meet, what the guidance is saying is then it's prudent to wear a mask. But what we've changed is the legal requirement. So we're saying it's no longer the law to do so, but let's trust your viewers to reach their judgment. When it's crowded, when it's busy, of course wear a mask. But people can reach a judgment on that.
2 days after July the 19th, there will be a session of Prime Minister's questions in which social distancing requirements in the chamber will be removed. You will be cheek by jowl with your colleagues. There is no mandatory requirement for people to wear face masks in the chamber, and one must suspect, given what we've heard from colleagues within your party, that some people will not be wearing them. I mean, 2 days after the country's told, let's stagger returning to work, let's wear masks when you're in crowded places, we're going to see politicians doing the entire opposite.
Again, I think it's right that Parliament, the National Parliament, comes back together. We get that working as it should. It enables the government to scrutinise effectively. It's for the Speaker, not for members of the government to decide what the rules are that apply in the chamber. But what the guidance has said and what the Chief Medical Officer was very clear in the press conference yesterday is that people will form their judgments in terms of when it's crowded as to what is appropriate. And I think your viewers will get that. We're trusting British people rather than making it a legal requirement. To date, it's been a legal requirement.
Did you not see what happened at Wembley Way at the weekend? There was no social distancing. No one was wearing any masks. Those are the people that you're asking to show some personal responsibility. Those are the people you're asking to show some common sense. If we've got England fans sticking flares up their backside, it does seem a bit of a stretch to say that they're going to be taking personal responsibility for wearing masks.
I think when we're showing exceptional cases like that individual, I don't think is where the British public are in terms of their guidance.
Tens of thousands of people in Wembley Way not wearing masks.
Well, I think there were some people, hugely regrettably, and the Wembley authorities are reviewing those who broke into the stadium. But again, I think we're talking about a very small number of people in a particular circumstance. That is not the norm of the British people. And the British people, I think, will understand the distinction between the legal requirement to wear masks, which has been the position up to this point. And as we learn to live with this virus, as we move to step 4, as we benefit from the British public responding in the way they have to taking up the vaccine, that allows us to free up the legal requirement and have guidance, and people will form their judgment. If they're meeting people who are not from their usual family group, their friendship group, if they're meeting people in a very crowded place, they will have the option then to wear a mask, and that is what the guidance will recommend.
But as the racism directed at the players, on the pitch inside Wembley demonstrates, the actions of a small minority can have a huge impact. I just want to focus a little bit on the racism that the footballers have experienced. Tyrone Mings wrote this on Twitter last night. You don't get to stoke the fire at the beginning of the tournament by labelling our anti-racism message as gesture politics and then pretend to be disgusted when the very thing we're campaigning against happens. That's an England footballer, a black England footballer, laying some of the blame for the racism that he and his colleagues experienced at the door of your party, at the door of your Home Secretary.
Well, I completely condemn the racism that those footballers have suffered. I think the country at large does and has been shocked by it, and that's why the government is taking action through the Online Harms Bill. The Culture Secretary, as you know, has been meeting with senior black footballers, working with them to ensure that the companies that provide the platforms for this racist abuse are tackled. We're bringing legislation forward to do that.
Well, what action has been taken against Natalie Elphicke, your colleague within the party, who sent a message to the Conservatives' WhatsApp group? They lost. Would it be ungenerous to suggest Rashford should have spent more time perfecting his game and less time playing politics? I mean, what does it say about the state of your party that she felt comfortable sending that message to her colleagues?
Well, that message was wrong, and Natalie has apologised for it. But we're taking action to tackle this through the Online Harms Bill, and that is what needs to happen. We need to ensure that those platforms take action, and if they don't, the government will take action against them.
I have often quoted the Prime Minister to government ministers on occasions such as this. His comments about pickaninnies with watermelon smiles, the problem with Africa is that we're not in charge anymore. His comments about Muslim women looking like letterboxes. And the response is always that they need to be viewed in context. But isn't the context that those remarks now need to be seen in is the dog's abuse that has been thrown against black English footballers simply because they missed a penalty kick? Isn't that the context in which we need to view those remarks now?
No, we need to condemn those remarks against the footballers. The racism that they've suffered is completely unacceptable. That is why we are taking action in terms of the Online Harm Bill, and that is why the platforms that provide the opportunity for people to make those remarks themselves need to take urgent action. We've been very clear on that. The Culture Secretary has been working with the FA, with leading footballers to ensure action is taken. It's completely unacceptable, and we are acting on it.
Well, why on earth would the Prime Minister and the Home Secretary choose not to condemn fans who were booing players who took the knee? A gesture that they have made perfectly clear from the start of the tournament. It's not about Black Lives Matter, but it was about them making a stand against racism. Racism that we've just seen clearly demonstrated in the past 48 hours.
Well, the Home Secretary has repeatedly taken a stand against racism. She herself has been subject
gesture politics is what she called it.
With respect, the Home Secretary herself has been the subject of appalling online racist abuse. She herself has been on the receiving end of this. She has consistently condemned racist abuse online, and she is taking action as Home Secretary against some of the extreme right-wing groups that are responsible for this. So she is using her office to take action to clamp down on it, but she herself has suffered from it, she understands it, and she is acting on it.
Stephen Barclay, good to see you this morning, and as I said, in the studio as well. Great to have you on. Thanks for being with us.
Pleasure.
Now, still to come on the programme at 7:30, I'll be asking the Mayor of Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham, what he makes of moves to ease lockdown measures in England next Monday. At 7:45, we'll be discussing calls for climate change to be regarded as an emergency like the coronavirus pandemic. A tale of two cultures. We're going to be joined by the writer Florence Olajide to discuss her new memoir about being British born but raised in Africa. That coming your way at 8:45. But as we always do, time to take a quick look at the latest coronavirus data. 34,471 new infections were reported in the most recent 24-hour period, along with 6 deaths. It takes the total number of people who died within 28 days of a positive test to 128,431. 42,000 first doses of coronavirus vaccines have been given. 107,620 received their second. That means 34.87 million people have now been fully vaccinated against the crisis. Our economics and data editor, Ed Conway, has been taking a look at the direction in which some of the numbers are moving.
A lot of new numbers there from the Prime Minister and indeed his colleagues, and it's worth just taking it apart and looking at what the data is saying about COVID-19. Right now, the broad story is that cases are going up a fair bit, but you're seeing a bit of a divergence between cases and admissions. And the best way of looking at that is looking at these charts, these lines showing you the dark blue one is cases, the higher there is, the more cases, and the red line is showing you hospital admissions. It's on a different axis here, but I've put them together so you can get a sense of look how similar those shapes are there, and look at the lines starting to diverge more recently. But you don't get a sense there from that about what's happening with growth rates. For that, we need to look at a logarithmic chart. So same data, logarithmic scale on both sides. And what you can see is the steeper these lines are, the faster the growth rate. And have a look over here. There is a divergence, isn't there? There's a gap between these two lines. But the steepness of those lines is actually quite similar. In fact, they're both doubling every 11 days. So cases doubling every 11 days, admissions doubling every 11 days. And if you carry that on, here's what you might see in the future. Simple extrapolation based on recent growth rates. You're talking about cases getting up to about 100,000 by late July. So that's not a modelling. That's, although Sage is saying something similar, that's just based on recent growth rates. And that's been a pretty reliable indicator of where we've headed recently. Same thing for hospitalisations. If you have that going up by the same rate, you're talking about over 1,000 by the middle of July as well, and potentially getting up to 2,000 as well. But notably, that is a lot lower than we saw in those previous winter peaks. So I just put that back to the kind of chart we saw before, so not logarithmic, and look at the kind of height of those. So you've got cases going a lot higher than they were in the winter, whereas you've got hospitalisations a fair bit lower, but still there will be concerns about what that means for the NHS. Another way of just looking at this is looking at what happens to hospitalisations and just comparing the shape of these lines last time around. So the dark line is last time around, the winter spike in hospitalisations, and this time around is that red line. You can see already we're running at a lower rate in terms of the increase in hospitalisations, and the same thing again for intensive care admissions, going up pretty steeply in the winter, but less steeply this time around. So that might reassure those in government looking at this, but nonetheless, the numbers, especially on cases, are likely to get quite scary in the next few weeks.
Ed Conway there. Some other news now. And heavy rain caused flash flooding in parts of London and the south of England last night. In Isleworth in West London, cars could be seen driving through flooded roads. A number of underground stations were closed. All this as the Met Office issued a weather warning for a large part of southern England. Well, this was the scene on Portobello Road in West London after nearly 3 inches of rain hit the capital in just 90 minutes. Looks a bit deeper than 3 inches, doesn't it? Residents in nearby Ladbroke Grove were left counting the cost of the damage, with the council saying some homes were evacuated due to flooding and collapsed ceilings. Police in Cuba are patrolling the capital, Havana, following protests against food shortages and high prices. The country is experiencing its worst economic crisis in decades during the COVID-19 pandemic, following the tightening of decades-old sanctions under the former US President Donald Trump. Cuban President Miguel Diaz-Canel has said the demonstrations were being stirred up on social media. At least 50 people have died at a hospital in southern Iraq after a fire tore through a COVID-19 ward. The country's health ministry has not provided an official account as to what caused the blaze, which has left dozens of others injured. A heat wave is raging in the western United States, with firefighters struggling to contain wildfires across the country's west coast. Last month, North America saw its hottest June ever, and California and Oregon are set to feel near-record temperatures in the coming days. Our US correspondent Greg Milam has the latest from Palm Springs in California.
Well, they're no strangers to the heat here in Palm Springs, but even in this desert city, the last few weeks and particularly the last few days have been pretty intense here, day after day of record-breaking temperatures, and we now know that they've just had the hottest June ever here in Palm Springs. You can see what they try to do to help people who are here, these misters that catch the passers-by, something of a lifesaver on a day like today, but you can see for yourself the restaurants certainly outside empty at the moment. And it's not just here in Palm Springs, of course. Large swathes of the western United States seeing this heat, tens of millions of people in places not used to dealing with it are now being affected by it. And the climate scientists say we can expect to see more of this in the years to come. The effects of climate change making these heat waves more likely and more intense. And particular problem here is that the minimum temperature every day is also setting records. So it's not even cooling down at night to allow people to recover from the heat of the day. And the doctors say that is a stressor on the human body. This is one factor, the heat. There is extreme drought across huge parts of this part of the United States. We've seen those wildfires as a result of those tinder dry conditions. The wildfires here in California have burned more, twice as much, in fact, of the state as they had at the same stage last year. And last year was a record-breaking year for wildfires in California. There are power lines in those wildfire areas that are also at risk, putting power supplies in real danger. One firefighter here is saying it looks like we're about to have a whole year of summer.
Well, let's see how the weather is looking domestically. Kirsty's standing by with all the details. And if the papers are to be believed, Kirsty, you can clarify this one. We might have a heat wave of our own on the way.
We could do, and certainly it won't be anything like we've seen in parts of America and also in Scandinavia, really, really hot at the moment. But we are expecting to see a return of summer to our shores. And I think for many that'll be a welcome change, especially after yesterday's rain.
Look forward to brighter skies. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Good morning. Not everybody likes the heat, but I think most of us would be glad to see something a little bit more summery return to our shores. Looks as though the next few days will be fairly settled, warming up quite nicely into the weekend. A little bit grey in places this morning, but the cloud will thin and break. And there are a few showers lingering from last night, but nothing like those showers yesterday. We're not going to see those again today, thankfully. So for many, it's a largely dry day with brighter sunny spells, light, well-scattered showers, so a good chance you'll stay dry. Northern and eastern coast, a little bit cloudier with some low cloud and coastal fog here, but temperatures widely into the low 20s. Any showers that develop will fade away this evening to leave a dry night.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Now, the last time this happened was 4 centuries ago. The National Trust says a baby beaver has been born on Exmoor. Oh, there we go. Exmoor for the first time in 400 years. Here is the kit, as of course they're known, caught on film at the Holnacott Estate in Somerset. It comes after the Trust reintroduced 2 adult beavers to an enclosure in January last year. Can't believe I got through that one. Anyway, still to come, I'll be chatting with the Mayor of Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham, for his take on plans to press ahead with lifting lockdown in England. Welcome back. The government may be pushing ahead with the lifting of measures in England on Monday, but it is urging people to show caution as coronavirus cases rise. In the last few minutes, I spoke to the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Stephen Barclay. Here's what he had to say to accusations that the messaging is confusing.
If you're saying, is this unprecedented? Is this complex? Is this challenging? Has the government, have our scientists been learning about the virus as we went through? We saw that before Christmas. When the Kent variant came along, we had to change our plans. Of course, we've followed the data, and we've changed our plans if the data has required that. We've followed the science throughout, but it's been complex, it's been unprecedented. I think your viewers appreciate that, but they also recognise that the vaccine is the way through this. We have deployed that. 2/3 of the adult population now having their 2 jabs. So the vaccine is the way forward, but we also need to live with this condition and get the economy moving again.
Our political correspondent, Kate McCann, is in the studio this morning. Good to see you. Just in terms of this accusation of mixed messaging, look, it's clearly not just journalists that are putting this point to the Prime Minister, but the journalists that do include the front page of the Daily Telegraph today, which is saying something.
Yeah, and I don't really think that Steve Barclay could answer the question fully there, because it's a difficult one to answer. I mean, nobody would disagree with him on the essential point that at some point we do need to learn to live with COVID-19 and we also need to reopen the economy. Everybody knows that. That's generally accepted. I think the problem the government has is that they've gone back and forth on this idea about, is it Freedom Day? No, it's not Freedom Day. You know, the Prime Minister saying everything's going to be released, and then a week later saying, actually, no, there'll be pretty strict guidance, actually, saying that you should wear a mask in certain instances. And the point that you put to him, you know, you're asking people to use their common sense, which is all well and good, but people want to know what the science says. They want to understand the data. And on that real specific point that you asked about, you know, what's the level of cases where we would start to be worried? When would we see the reintroduction of some stricter measures? There's no answer on that. And I think that will become the problem for the government, because until they can set that out very clearly, people will be a bit lost, and there will be mixed messaging in terms of, well, if you're saying it's not a legal requirement for me to wear a mask, then it can't be that bad. I probably won't catch the virus, because if I would, then you would have told me to wear one. And I think people will start to make those judgments, and we all have different attitudes to risk, and that will result in people changing their behaviour. And I think that's the thing the government's worried about, and that's why you're hearing we're listening to the scientists and we will change our policy dependent on the science, which could see the reintroduction of some measures later in the year.
Kate Bernard, many thanks indeed. Well, joining us now to discuss that and much more, the Mayor of Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham, is with us. Good to see you this morning, Mr Burnham.
Good morning.
Let's just start with that central point that we put to the Chief Secretary to the Treasury this morning. Do you see the messaging as mixed on the July 19th changes?
I'm afraid I do. I think there was a sensible shift in tone yesterday from the Prime Minister and other government ministers. But all that said to me was they kind of recognised the problem that they'd created with all of this rhetoric about Freedom Day. So there was a definite step back. But was it enough of a step back to fix the problem? Well, no, absolutely not. Because you need to put yourself in the shoes, Neil, of the 3.8 million people in this country who are clinically extremely vulnerable. So that's people with cancer or people who have, an immune condition. Is expect and recommend enough to give them confidence to go out and get on public transport next week, particularly those who have no choice but to use public transport? And I would say it's not enough. So I would fully expect come Monday, Tuesday to be getting complaints from people that they feel unable to go to essential hospital appointments or to be able to get their shopping. And this is the point the government has to take on board. One person's Freedom Day is another person's Fear Day.
To what extent, then, if at all, do you have the capacity as Mayor of Greater Manchester to do things differently? You mentioned public transport there. Can you act unilaterally to insist on it?
See, transport outside of London is different. We only control part of it, and it's not the main part of it, it's the tram system. So many more people take bus journeys every day in Greater Manchester. And because of the way buses were deregulated many years ago, we don't control the bus system, we don't control the train system. So if we were to try and enforce on the trams, I think it would cause more confusion potentially, and it would just be unworkable from an enforcement point of view. It would be suboptimal. But the right fix is for the government to recognise that a mandatory requirement on face coverings on public transport is the right way to go, because it isn't purely an issue of personal responsibility, as the government are saying it is. It's exactly like the passive smoking debate of 15 years ago. One person's choice can affect another person's physical and mental health. So if you are a cancer patient going for chemo and you're on a bus or a tram next week and you're next to somebody not wearing a mask, that person's physical health could be at risk, but also their mental health will be affected by that situation because of the panic and the anxiety caused by it. So they just haven't thought this one through, I'm afraid, and they've got themselves into a mess with the Freedom Day rhetoric. It can't all be about individual choices at this stage. It's still a matter of collective safety, everybody acting to protect each other to get us through this pandemic.
I wonder if we might talk just a little bit about the England game, and of course the mural of Marcus Rashford being defaced in Withington. I'm just wondering what action your office, what action Greater Manchester Police will be taking to establish who is responsible and what will happen in future.
Greater Manchester Police reacted very swiftly in the early hours of Monday morning to cover the graffiti up, and it will actually be, the mural will be repaired this morning, Neil, which is exactly what should be happening. But the people of Manchester have spoken, the people of Withington and beyond. I don't know if you've seen the mural as it appears right now. It is covered in unbelievable tributes to Marcus, role model, hero, which is all exactly what he is. And while I was, yesterday, I was so depressed by what had happened. But actually, let's not let that 1% or even less than 1% of people dominate the news headlines. 99% of people have come right behind this England team, because this is an England team for everybody. And that should be the sort of abiding memory of this summer. They took us to our first final in 55 years. And Marcus was a part of that. How about we celebrate their achievement And how about we capture the spirit that Gareth Southgate has created around this England team and carry it forward and define England by that, not by constantly talking about this despicable 1% of people who've always kind of brought racism to English football.
Yeah, another England player, Tyrone Mings, has, in essence, in a tweet last night, laid some of the blame for the racism that he and his colleagues have experienced at the door of senior politicians within this government. He pulled out Priti Patel as an individual, as someone who he claims was stoking fanning the flames of racism in this country. I mean, do you agree with that?
Well, I have to say, we've lived through a decade where leaders have not led when it's come to protecting everybody's safety. There has been a dog whistle politics, some people call it. I think going from here, everyone has to understand that if somebody in a position of responsibility fails to condemn or even supports a decision to attack an anti-racist statement, it can enable or it can encourage people beneath to act in a racist manner. So I just think people need to listen to what these England players are saying. They have shown real leadership this summer. They came under huge pressure to stop taking the knee, pressure from many politicians, and they did not buckle. And that was leadership, to my mind. They stood by their principles, black and white teammates together. They stood as a group of working class lads who would not be divided. And I think there's a really important message from that England team to all politicians in this country, including the Home Secretary. I think the Deputy Leader of the Labour Party put it very well yesterday. If you blow dog whistles, the dogs will start barking at some point, and you have a responsibility for that. And I think everyone's got to move beyond these culture wars and the kind of pointless divisions that it creates. Well, not just pointless, the dangerous divisions that they create, and learn from what this England team has done to this country this summer. And politicians should be kind of following that rather than obviously seeking to derail it.
Andy Burnham, thanks very much for joining us this morning.
Thank you very much.
Well, the Labour Party has long relied on overwhelming support from Black and Asian Britons. But at the last election, the Conservatives increased their share of votes from minority ethnic communities, with some blaming Labour for failing to promote minority talent within the party. Our editor-at-large, Adam Bolton, has been looking at Labour's stronghold among minority ethnic voters and the Conservative efforts to break it down.
For many years, an enduring thread in the tapestry of British politics has been the assumption that the Labour Party had the so-called ethnic vote stitched up. Immigrant families from the Indian subcontinent, the Caribbean and Africa would vote centre-left en bloc. But times are changing. Perhaps 1 in 4 are voting now for other parties. And there are prominent minority Conservative cabinet ministers and advisers.
I think that the Labour Party have assumed that the ethnic minority vote has always been theirs to have, and I think that's why it's come as a shock in the last few years to see that people in areas like mine in Sandwell are starting to change how they vote, and if there are no efforts to try and address this, then I think general elections in years to come could become very unpredictable.
Was it difficult coming out as a Tory?
There was no option. If I joked about voting Conservative, I was looked upon possibly even worse than if I said I wanted to, be a drug dealer or rob a bank.
The public image of the Conservative Party has certainly changed. 20 years ago, the Tories had no ethnic minority MPs. Today, they're 22, and a record number of cabinet ministers. But are ethnic minority voters really switching to the Conservatives? Or are the political leaders of the party ahead of them? Professor Maria Soboleska studies voter trends. She believes Labour has taken minority support for granted.
They have failed to promote their ethnic minority politicians to high office, and they have had those ethnic minority politicians available in the backbenches since the 1980s. And they don't really campaign in areas where ethnic minority voters live directly in some of these areas. So yes, Labour definitely has a lot of fault to bear here.
Back in 1987, Diane Abbott became Britain's first black female MP. She's still in Parliament and convinced her choice was the right one.
And why did you want to become an MP?
Oh, I wanted to change the world.
And, you know, if you were black in the 80s, the Labour Party was a party you joined if you wanted to change the world. And I've not regretted it.
Now on the backbenches, she accepts her party hasn't matched the Tories with cabinet appointments. But she predicts any switchers are in for disappointment.
The Tories are not really going to do anything for black and brown voters en masse. So I think that the black and brown vote for the Tories has a natural point beyond which it doesn't go. How are you going to vote for people that all the time are rolling out policies which are directed against you?
As the government sets out to level up across the country, no party should take minority votes for granted. Adam Bolton, Sky News.
Very cosy. Still to come this hour. Should climate change be treated with as much urgency as the coronavirus pandemic? We'll be asking two climate experts next.
There is a lot of gas being fired all around us. It is an absolute carnival kind of atmosphere out here for Prime Minister Modi's decisive victory. These students are defying the prohibitory orders, and now they're going to be arrested. We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news. The roads have been inundated. The only way out is to get people by boat. What is feared that over 200 people might have died because of these landslides. This on any given day would have been bustling with people, but today it's absolutely deserted. This is one of the most sensitive areas of northeast Delhi where there's been clashes. I'm Neville Lazarus and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi.
I'm coming from a family of fishermen. Actually, my family has been fishermen for 5 generations. The fishermen catch this plastic by accident, so we give them the motivation and the system to bring it back to the land. We have collected already more than 110,000 kilos of plastic from the bottom of the sea.
Did you know symptoms of hay fever can develop at any stage of life, not just in childhood? The Pollen Reports, sponsored by Philips Connected Air Purifiers.
After yesterday's downpours, the weather is finally settling down. Most places are looking dry today with sunny spells. A few showers are possible for parts of Scotland, England and Wales, but these will be lighter and few and far between compared to recent days. Temperatures up a notch, high teens up to around 23 or 24. A little bit cloudier for some North Sea coastal areas. Grass pollen levels will be high to very high during the warm sunny weather. Spores and weed pollen levels also high.
The Pollen Reports, sponsored by Philips Connected Air Purifiers.
A report is calling for climate change to be treated with as much urgency as the coronavirus pandemic. Research led by Glasgow Caledonian University says that resources directed towards combating the virus will detract focus from countries in need of environmental aid. Pleased to say, joining us on the programme, the Director at the GCU Centre for Climate Justice, Professor Tazeen Jeffrey, and the Executive Director of the Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance, Dr Mithika Mwenda, both joining us on the programme. Great to see you both, and Dr Mwenda, to you in just a second. But Professor Jeffrey, if we can start with you, just establish exactly the rationale for treating climate change and COVID-19 in similar ways.
The rationale is quite simple and straightforward. Our study has found that COVID-19 has derailed the NDC development processes across Africa. We have found that resources have been diverted away from tackling climate action whilst being diverted into tackling the pandemic. And at the same time, we have seen that the lives and livelihoods of the poorest people in the world have deteriorated, and for the first time, extreme poverty is expected to rise since 1998. So the rationale for tackling climate action could not be clearer.
Dr Mwenda, tell us then a little bit about these NDCs, these nationally determined contributions under Paris, and why they seem to have been somewhat displaced over the past 12 to 16 months.
Well, since, these were investment instruments which were agreed by a community of nations when they agreed on the Paris Agreement. And each country has committed to what they are going to do to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions and build resilience of communities at the front line of climate crisis. Over the last 12 or 6 months, we expected countries to deliver on their second commitment to tell the world under their commitment what have they done. But because of this, the pandemic, it's very few countries were able to deliver on this, and we have seen the breakdown of climate crisis. The climate is actually the earth is warming. If you can look at what's happening in various parts of the world, and so we are actually at the tipping point. Yet we are not able to deliver on what the country is committed to do under the Paris Agreement.
All of that then, Professor, demands the question, I mean, what is the role for the industrialised West in trying to get this back on track?
There's no doubt in our minds that the industrialised nations need to do everything they can to mitigate and bring down carbon emissions as fast as possible. Mitigation is only part of the solution, though. We need to put more energy into adaptation and helping support the poorest nations to adapt to and cope with the challenges that climate crisis is having and compounding the lives of the poorest people, particularly women and girls in these nation states. So we are calling for more support. We're calling for more finance to support the poorest and the most vulnerable people, noting that they've contributed little, if anything, to the climate crisis. And secondly, we're calling for climate action and for the emergency to be tackled in a more holistic way, bringing together the environmental, health and development sectors together, bringing around the table a diverse range of stakeholders and bringing in people's voices, communities' voices to help shape and develop the solutions to our climate challenges ahead.
Dr Mwenda, I suspect that there will be those in Whitehall who will point to the COP26 meeting taking place a little later this year as evidence of the industrialised West's commitment to sorting out climate change. But at the same time, I wonder whether you feel that Africa is represented as fully as it might be at summits like COP26.
Well, these are the questions which I'm asking. We have been fighting as Africa and industrialized countries to see how we are going to be represented, you know, there is the issue of virtual COPs and also physical COPs. We are vehemently opposed to virtual COPs because of the situation in the continent, where energy, we require energy for power, the technologies, the virtual meetings. Many people do not have access to energy. Precisely, around 600 million Africans do not access that. We need gadgets like these computers, and we need also internet access. All these do not really are not affordable, and so we find ourselves disadvantaged. We are pushing, and we have got assurance of the COP presidency, the UK, that they are working on a physical COP. And even if it is physical COP, we find ourselves again disadvantaged because of right now we have the problem of the vaccine. We don't know whether many countries have been locked out, they are not able to access the vaccine. These are the issues of equity. And you find that Africa is generally, wherever a crisis like this, not only climate crisis, but also the COVID-19 pandemic, and everywhere that we are going to be disadvantaged in terms of participation. And that's what we are calling is the issue of procedural justice, that we find ourselves disadvantaged every time we have these international processes like international dialogue on climate change, climate crisis.
I'm afraid both of we will have to leave it there. Dr. Moedna, Professor Jaffrey, great to have you on the programme this morning. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Very good morning.
Thank you.
And just a reminder, you can watch plenty more stories like that about the impact on our environment on our daily climate show. That's on Sky News every weekday at 6:30 and 9:30.
Look forward to brighter skies. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Good morning. Parts of the UK saw a month's worth of rain falling in just a few hours yesterday, but thankfully the torrential downpours have moved off, although it is looking very unsettled across western and central parts of Europe in the coming days. But we should see summer returning. I think welcome news for many of us. So for many, it should be a largely dry start, any overnight showers clearing away. It will brighten up as well, so a bit more sunshine coming as the day goes on, although always staying a little bit grey and misty around some of those North Sea coasts. Now, we might just see a shower this afternoon across parts of Britain, but I really think these will be few and far between and certainly lighter than yesterday's downpours. Temperatures reaching into the low 20s, looking largely dry in the sunshine across parts of Northern Ireland and the Republic. Showers fading away this evening, a dry and mild night will follow.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.